All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Episode 2, Crossing the River, an esports podcast with yours truly, Brightside, and my glorious co host, looking as ravishing as ever, Apon Zeus. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, Brightside. Very, very well. Looking forward to do this episode too. I feel like we have a lot of cool things to talk about.
A lot to get into. I haven't talked since before Last Chance qualifiers. So
Yeah.
everything TI to get into, a little bit of other esports as well. Worlds for League of Legends and Worlds for Age of Empires were all going on within pretty much the same month. So a lot of stuff in the esports world to get into. But let's start with the obvious. Tundra have won TI. What were your thoughts on them winning?
So my friends and I, we made like a spreadsheet where every single one of us could predict like every single series, as well as like before any game has started, we would predict which teams we think would not make it out of groups, and so on and so forth.
Oh boy.
I had Tundra not making it out of groups.
Okay.
So
Well, that's not great on you.
No, not great on my end. Seeing their games though, they just looked on another level. They just looked on another level.
Yeah, I had this discussion a little bit. I was kind of curious on your thoughts. I think this the most dominant TI run ever because I don't think they were the number 1 seed out of groups,
No.
but they were upper bracket and then they clean swept every team except for one loss in the upper bracket final to Team Secret. But they didn't lose any other game in the playoffs besides that. And so from a games one perspective, it was so utterly dominant with what they were bringing.
Yeah, it was like very dominant, as well as like the way that they did it. It just looked like they were like just on a completely different level and understanding of the game that no other team really was able to match. Um, I don't quite remember, how did Wings do in the playoffs at TI6?
I
I
know
felt like
Wings. I know
yeah.
Wings dropped some games.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the second OG win could be considered more dominant because they were on everybody's radar. Everybody was looking at them. They were watching their replays. They were like, OG, you gotta look out for OG because they won the year before. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like when you go into a tournament with a big red bullseye on your back, that definitely makes it a lot harder to win. And if I recall correctly, they won that TI pretty handily. It
Yeah,
wasn't
also,
like it wasn't like they shocked the world or anything.
like also the 3-1, like the one game that Liquid actually won, it was more like OG
You
really lost that
you
game.
could
And
argue they probably shouldn't have won that game.
yeah. So I feel like in the way that Tundra won, they were most likely one of the most dominant TI runs ever. Just like I feel like in the way that their games look, like I feel like in the games that they've won, which were many, they just looked like unstoppable, and that teams didn't know how to figure them out. Even though there was like an extended break before the top four, so like everybody had time to actually study Tundra as well. So
I do think it's just really interesting that it's 2 years in a row now that this kind of unexpected team kind of comes in, and I don't. It seems I'm comparing them obviously to Team Spirit last year. Nobody
mhm,
expected Team Spirit to do well, and I
yeah.
think a lot of the same things can be said about Tundra. They kind of came in. They weren't on anybody's radar. They kind of had their own idea of how to play with this 33 micro hero early. These, I guess, Wraith Pact was an every hero thing, but they were the only team that made Naga specifically look really broken. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's just interesting that it's now 2 years straight that kind of this dark horse hero comes into TI and just takes it away.
I kind of wonder, like, does it maybe also have partially to do it like with being the dark horse, but also the fact that given that people aren't looking at you as much, there can be certain strategies and movements around the map that even with time cannot be figured out that easily, like throughout one tournament.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot about that because I mean, Tundra in this TI, I thought they abused how much farm was on the map. It felt like
Mhm.
every game they played, they had a net worth advantage. They were always increasing it, and I think that was largely in why Snake King was actually playing a lot of 5 Mirana to abuse that even more. So, just very curious that now back to back kind of dark horse winners for TI. The big losers, I guess, for were definitely PSG LGD, is they got knocked out by their own region of all things. Aster beat them, but that was really sad. I was kind of hoping for Ame to finally get his TI
Yeah.
win.
There were quite a few tragic moments this TI. Or like tragic if you are a fan of certain teams. If you are a fan of Thunder Awaken, oh, your heart. My heart broke. My heart broke. 1 HP. For people who haven't watched it, Thunder Awaken lost against Liquid for a top 6 spot. And in the last fight in game 3, there was like 1 HP on Pangolier, who would have been on dieback, and the fight would have most likely been won by Thunder Awaken. There was a moment before where there was a first hit bash by Matumba Man against Thunder Awaken. There was a lot of moments that, like, as the Thunder Awaken fan myself, I felt like, no, why? But overall, the games this TI, I feel like we have talked about how dominant Thunder was, but the games overall this TI were so good.
It felt like every game was crazy, just straight
Yeah.
up. And maybe that was even before the top 4. The games were crazy though. All the playoff games, I thought for the most part, there was with a couple of exceptions, were close. Came down to the last team fight games where you in other TIs, I feel like that isn't necessarily the case. So that was very nice to see. The meta, I think, was perfect for TI. Just you kind of go slightly later, you play slightly greedier, but it just causes for mayhem in the later part of the game.
Yeah, I also thought it was very interesting that before TI started and we saw the groups, many people thought Group A was a much stronger group than Group B. But as as the playoffs went on, actually Group B eliminated a lot of Group A teams, which I thought was very interesting to see as well. How overall our perception of teams can be sometimes for a tournament so off. It can just be so off.
Well, and it was just weird because I remember seeing on Twitter, I think it was Knoxville that tweeted it. He was like, we can't figure out the rhyme or reason to how Valve makes the groups for TI. It's not based off of DPC seeding. It's not based off of last year's TI. It's not based off of results, DPZ results. So it's just curious that another TI goes by. We're not sure how the groups are made, but then we think Group B is when it's made is so much better, and then Group A just kind of runs away with it.
Yeah. I I feel like that's a topic that spans esports more than others. Like that concept of seeding. I know it's a pretty big conversation in fighting games because usually fighting games are open brackets, so anybody can sign up. But then it's on the tournament organizer to try to avoid having like the top players fight against each other in a round 46. And so it's very much a tournament organizer discretion, and it's also kind of a quality of a good tournament if the tournament organizer is good at making that happen. And here in Dota, I feel like we want to have like, how do they do it? But is there really like a formula and how to do it, or is it just how how 5 people or so feel the most fair groups could be?
The problem
Um,
is that there's just simply not enough international gameplay in Dota.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
You compare it to a fighting game. I guess the only one that I follow really relatively closely is the Melee scene, Smash Bros. Melee.
Yeah.
But all of those tournaments, every top player is at every tournament. And you just
Mm-hmm.
can't say the same thing about Dota, especially this last year. I mean, two of the three majors didn't have like half of the top teams because of COVID, and health restrictions, and some people had visa issues.
Yeah, and
And
also the like, for example, like if you had gone off of like DPC points, then suddenly it looks weird because China had their own like regional because of COVID and
yeah,
not being able to attend and all of that. It's really tough how to make these groups.
yeah, I agreed. So interesting that one group is that much better. So moving on slightly. So we talked in the last podcast about Valve running all of the production, not third party, but offsite of TI in Norway or Sweden.
Yeah, in Norway.
In Norway. So all of the NA talent were in Norway except for the casters who were on site in Singapore. I actually thought it was really nicely done.
Yes.
It seemed very professional, and I do think a large reason why they held it in Norway was so they could use the 3D hero thing. I forget what they call it.
Yeah, alternate reality.
Yeah,
AR. Yeah,
yeah, they were using or augmented reality.
Augmented, yeah.
They were using the augmented reality to show these like really cool hero graphics and stuff on the screen. So, and in my opinion, I thought it was a huge success. That despite all of the controversy around it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very interesting topic because I've heard from some people that they very much disliked it. I think it was very well worth the try because you could very much, like, as you said, like you really liked it. Like you could very much see what they were trying to go for like a high quality studio, which they would not have been able to have in Singapore, especially if they had like two different locations. The one thing that for me felt a little bit like how can we avoid that is the fact, and I think it was something that was mentioned very early on once it came out that the panel was held in Norway. People were saying, well, what about pro players participating during draft? That was like a very early critique point. And I think PGL did a very good job there at addressing that point and having these pro players join the casters during the draft. However, that usually led to the panel during like the playoffs, and the longer the playoffs went on, more and more pro players came on. It led to the panel be kind of unnecessary, if you know what I mean.
They were almost just filler, right?
Yeah.
They'd talk about the game, the pre-draft, the pre-series discussion, and then they would cut to the casters who were doing the draft with normally two pro players. It was you're definitely right. They kind of were almost, I don't want to say they're obsolete, but they didn't felt needed at some points.
Yeah, and it must have also, in a way, I feel a little bit like my heart goes out to the people in Norway not being able to experience the experience of being at a TI. That's some privileged people who get to be a panel for TI. I feel like overall, having a panel like that, having that high quality of a panel was very nice. Too Good showed up. Who expected that, to be honest? Who expected that?
His opener was so cool. The way they did that. If you didn't see it, you'll have to find it. We can maybe attach it on the YouTube page or something. But they go into the panel, and it's just an empty seat, and then the three other normal panelists. Mm-hmm. And then they start zooming in on this empty seat. And there's like a little, it's like a bourbon or something on the rocks in front of it, and 2GD just comes walking in, and I really thought it was going to be somebody else. I don't know who I was expecting,
Yeah,
But
I thought it was gonna be like some sketch with Tsunami or something like
yeah,
that.
but it was so cool to see him back. I mean, he hasn't been part of the Dota scene since Shanghai. Since the
Yeah,
Shanghai Major, he was literally extradited from the scene, forcibly removed via Valve. So ultimate redemption for him. I hope to see him in more stuff too. I think he's awesome.
yeah. I thought he did a really, really good job. Given that, like, he must have had really done his homework of how good of a job he did. That he was like for a scene that he wasn't be able to be like involved in for I don't know how many years now, 6 or so.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting was he didn't, more so than other panel hosts. He would just, the draft would start and he would just literally tell them, "I'm not going to talk. You guys do your thing."
Mm-hmm.
And he'd just zip it and let the other three panelists kind of carry the conversation, which I thought was really cool because I feel like sometimes the panel or like the host tries to guide the conversation a little bit too much, or they can input they put their input in, but you want the other panelists to be talking. So I thought he did a really nice job of doing that.
Yeah, I always feel like the people who know when to step back, like that quality of knowing when to step back and when not to talk, I feel like it's like at times can be harder to accomplish than the quality of like when should you talk. Um, it also gives a lot of it gives a lot of trust towards your panel, which I felt like with like Effie on panel, with Jenkins on panel, like you have these very very good panelists. In my opinion, Effie is one of the best panelists currently in Dota. Like she has the Dota knowledge, and she's very well articulate about her points during draft. And I felt like if you can give that trust to certain people, it just pays off so well.
Agreed. And the I did want to point out one other thing about running an external production. Uh, I know a lot of people were catching Val was catching a lot of flame for it, but one other thing that I didn't see talked about too much was that it almost felt, I don't want to say necessary, but if they fly in all the talent for the NA talent right to Singapore,
Mhm.
then they have to do the same thing for the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Russian, all of these other broadcast teams that they put together. They have to fly all of them into Singapore as well. And so I do think that by having, I think all of them were off site. It kind of
Yes.
showed a bit of equity across the board in terms of they didn't show any bias towards the NA one. Like they kind of were like we love all of these. They brought in the casters for all of them obviously to Singapore, but all the panelists were offsite. So I thought that was interesting. I think it was Pyrian Flax that actually brought that up initially. I had seen on his tea time or whatever he does in the mornings.
Mhm.
So just an interesting point that Valve trying to be kind of equal across the board on how they treat all of the talent.
Yeah. Um, how did you feel about the last chance qualifier, Brightside? We haven't you and I haven't talked about that yet.
I mean, I think we can definitely look in with the benefit of hindsight and say that we probably should have expected the winner, the people that come out of the last chance qualifiers to do well.
Mhm.
I feel like this happens in almost every Dota tournament. Some team goes into the lower bracket, they get to play more games, they make a run because they're getting more experience on the patch, they're getting more games together. And I think that absolutely is part of why Liquid and Secret look so good. Is they had this extra mini TI to figure out their brand, to figure out their gameplay, and they had insane results because of it.
Also, how I meant more like how did you feel about the concept of last chance qualifier and how the production was handled around that?
Well, I think the production was lackluster
Mm-hmm.
for what it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, like I said, it was a mini TI. I feel like you flew all these teams into Singapore. They're playing on LAN, but it didn't feel like a LAN.
Yeah.
We had the cameras of the teams in the lobby or like in their rooms, but there was really nothing else around it. Like, it felt like there was a lot of teams that were really hoping to get one of those 2 last chance qualifier slots. And there was just, I feel like we didn't really get any of the team aspect. None of the LAN stuff that you expect came out. Instead, we kind of just had this meh quality production that was fine, but the caster pairings I thought were weird. And then, you know, the effort that they put into some of the, like, even just the splash screens, like their transitions. They had like they were like in the Roche pit with the 2 TV monitor. You seem to not like that. It was just, it had a weird vibe to it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think overall, like, yes, it was like a mini TI. It was like I actually right after our last podcast, I actually caught COVID, and I was a little bit sick during the first few days of Last Chance qualifiers. But I still, like, some of the games that I caught, like, they were some hype games as well, and it just felt like they weren't given justice of, like, be like I feel like people will say, well, they're not the best teams, but they're like they're the top 200 players in a game that has, I don't know how many hundred thousands of players. Like, they're really fucking good.
And I thought, like, the whole idea behind the Last Chance qualifier was kind of to have this lead into TI hype, where you kind of have this brawl for these last 2 slots, and then you go into the tournament and you get to watch all the TI games. It just didn't feel that way. I'm not really. And I do think a lot of that falls on the production and just how the coverage was handled. Yeah.
For me, it left a sour taste in my mouth. The fact that I knew that any team that got knocked out of Last Chance qualifiers had to, like, go home within 1 or 2 days. To me, that just feels wrong.
Well, they didn't have to go home. I know some of the talent or some of the players paid to stay there for the TI, but they were not. They were flown in by Valve. Their housing is by Valve, but they had to pay for it out of pocket afterwards. So that was weird. Again, it just, I don't know how much revenue Valve brings in with TI. I mean, I guess you point out, right? PGL had to bring in a betting sponsor probably to bring in extra revenue to offset some of the costs of running the LCQ and the groups. But it just felt like they were cutting a lot. There was a lot of corners cut that you didn't feel that way previously.
100% agreed. I had this thought, a hypothetical question. I feel like we both would agree. The fact that they brought in a betting sponsor, it did not feel like they got, like you just now mentioned, like, it did not feel like they got enough money out of a betting sponsor to justify it. I think we can both kind of agree on that. But apart from that, like, putting that aside, there was, like, a betting sponsor on the Last Chance qualifier and during the group stage, but there was nothing during the playoffs. And I actually just noticed that, like, halfway through the playoffs, and I'm like, oh yeah, there are no, like, odds being shown ever. And I was thinking about, would I be okay with having a betting sponsor during group stage and, like, something like Last Chance qualifier if the money would be worth it?
I think I might. I might. It felt like they took the money that they were getting from this I imagine it was a pretty lucrative offer that they got from GG. I think it was GG Bet, right?
Yeah.
From GG Bet, and it went where into their pocket. You almost have to think that way, because again, it was. I think LCQ in theory has so much potential. And I thought that it just didn't get enough justice, like you said. So, and again, I do think having a betting, maybe I'm alone. I don't notice the betting sponsors that much. And I understand the whole dynamic around it. Like, you don't want to be promoting these gambling or the shadiness of the esports gambling sites or any of that. Just from my perspective, I just don't notice them. I guess they show the odds during the game, but I'm barely looking at that part of the screen anyways. So it's just, some of that just almost to me seems blatant, like irrelevant.
Yeah, it's very easy to be outraged about it because like to take like the screenshot of when the odds are there and being like, look, they showed that over a team fight. And like, I feel like that is more an issue of, which I feel like we can go a little bit more into a technical director issue, where like when these odds show up is on the technical director. Like, that is the person who will like tell you what's like where you go right now if you have multiple observers, what you show on the screen right now, and like if you push like certain push ads or stats or whatever. And it's on the technical director if odds like that are being shown on the spot in the screen where it would be important to see right now. And so I feel like, yeah, I am not like, I understand, as you said, like I understand the hesitancy of bringing in betting sponsors, but I also see the realistic aspect of money, money.
money. Agreed. I agree. I agree completely. And, to that extent, I will say the only thing that bugs me about the betting sponsors is that the odds update in a regularity that makes me think it's rigged, because we watch the games on a delay.
Yeah.
But the odds update, the odds do not reflect the delay. The odds are happening in real time compared to what we see. So if you go onto a site and look at the odds, that doesn't necessarily reflect the odds that you're seeing on the stream. And so that's the weird part to me, is that, I guess part of it's transparency, but also understanding that a lot of people aren't going to see that. They're just going to see the odds. They're going to be like, oh, these are nice odds, I'll bet on them. And then you look at the site and they'll be different. You'll be like, wait, what happened? And so the disconnect there is odd.
Yeah, and it feels, yeah, I've never betted actually like not on anything. So I can't really speak about it too much of like how it is to go on there or anything like that, but I 100% agree. And it just is.
The obvious comparison is to sports gambling, right? Esports versus sports gambling. And in sports gambling, at least in the US, I don't want to say it's transparent, but it's very official, I guess, is the for lack of a better word, where there's verified sites that you can use that they aren't shady compared to the sites that we're using for esports gambling. And everything just seems very official. And if I feel like if we can get to that point for esports betting, I feel like there'll be less problems. The problem for me is just the whole shadiness aspect of it. It really is it's just weird. It has a weird vibe, Apon.
I 100% agree actually with that. It feels much shadier than in normal sports betting, and it's also because I feel like the ways that laws are currently being handled is very much by a lot more old people who don't really understand a lot of online stuff. Is that the Facebook I can search with for the Google? And it makes it tough to have like laws that are actually beneficial for both parties, in terms of transparency and like how to handle it and all of that. Yeah,
and a lot of, like you said, it's just esports as a whole is still, it's growing, and it's been growing. That doesn't mean I would say it's universally understood. The two things definitely do not go hand in hand. So it'll be interesting to see how the gambling aspect. I imagine we'll have them for this upcoming DPC tour. Just prep for it now.
Yep.
I've already accepted the fate. So, one final TI thing. You know, the production, the group stage production in the LCQ was blah. I thought the main stage was really nicely done. Like we said, the external production was nice. The weird thing is that there weren't sound booth proofs or soundproof booths. There we go. And so in years past at TIs, you know, you'd have this giant grand stage, and the players would walk into these massive booths. Just you know, I don't know exactly what they're made of, but they're soundproof. And that didn't happen this year. Instead, I believe they had just headphones, and they would filter in white noise through the headphones. And I believe at least in the first set of games, or the first day, the players could apparently hear the English commentary as to moves. And so it was actually winding up to be a benefit if you understood English, or I guess a detriment if you didn't understand English. So yeah, thoughts on this?
Yeah, can I go on a little bit of a rant here, because I have a lot of thoughts about this year's TI. I followed a lot of like what people thought about TI. I spoke with, I feel like, quite a few people about how they felt about this year's TI. The soundproof thing actually is something that a lot of people mentioned, and they mention it as a reason to say why this TI sucked. And I'm always bewildered by that, because it happened on day one. It's terrible. I don't know why there aren't booths there, but like I think Seb said it, and I think some 2 or 3 other teams said it as well. On day 2, it was fixed and it wasn't an issue anymore. And I feel like that is one thing that a lot of people didn't acknowledge, that like these issues were being brought up and they were fixed.
I think it was Aoi too said something about it.
Yeah. You made a Twitter, right? And so there are a lot of people who still mention that as like one of their major complaints. I will also highlight example at the League of Legends Worlds. There are no booths either. I think it's a little bit different, because I feel like in that game, it's much more about the in the moment, how well you organize as a team and how well you function right now. And it's less macro decisions, as in like somebody has a DD, let's not smoke, something like that. But I feel like these issues that have come up during this year's TI, soundproof, there were some questionable cuts from like the audience to the game, or vice versa, some questionable going into the replay when there was a fight happening. All of these things are pretty normal for a production to happen, and I think it was just the fact that we weren't that we always had such a good production that even being slightly off for many people is immediately, this just sucks. While it wasn't that big of a detriment.
I do think that the first day stuff, you're right, it wasn't acknowledged that it was fixed really. Like, and I got one of my good friends who was really into Dota, doesn't follow it as much anymore. He was just like, it just doesn't feel like TI without the booths, and I was just like, what? And I do think a lot of people feel that way though, where you don't see these big booths, the big stage, the whatever. I guess the immaculate production value. You don't see some of that stuff, and you're like, well, this is a shitty TI. This is a bad TI. And
the difference to this, I would say, is I feel like the reason why they didn't have booths is because they had this new system of a rotating platform, which made for very, very, very low downtime between series. Which I was like, that's great. Like sometimes the break between series was, in my opinion, a little bit too short. We could have maybe had like 5 minutes more of talking about the series, maybe showing some content or whatever. But like compare that to where we sometimes had like downtime of 45 minutes or so. Like I take that, like only having 5 to 10 minutes downtime instead of 45. That's much nicer. And I feel like it doesn't feel like TI is like, it's like, yeah, it's different, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's worse.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think it's just the sound. You don't need the booths, and I feel like that's something that some people just maybe just didn't fully understand. They were like, you see them on the stage with just these headphones on, and you're like, well, they're gonna hear everything that's happening. Oh no! Oh. In reality, it's just as effective if it's done correctly, and that was the big thing, was that it wasn't done correctly, and then it got fixed. So it is good that it got fixed, obviously. So good on Valve to get that done.
And I will say about that, like, it's good that they fixed it. Every production will have issues. Like, for example, I don't know if you watched the League of Legends World, the opening ceremony as well as the closing ceremony. They had multiple sound issues where the host's mic wasn't being picked up as she spoke, and like multiple of those issues were happening at the grand finals, at the biggest esports event in terms of viewership numbers. Like, it happens. Shit happens, and then you fix it.
Yep. Agreed. Moving on. Post TI stuff. So very quickly, there was a tweet from a journalist. I will just read it for everybody here, assuming it opens. This was I think he's a freelance journalist.
Yep.
So none of this is some official source or anything, but apparently at TI, Valve held an official meeting with many of the teams to discuss the future. The first thing, TrueSight is still on for next year. It will come out closer to the TI finals than TI itself. So that's interesting. And then the second thing that they said was Valve has reaffirmed their commitment to growing Dota into next year. Which, me reading this, it's not an official source or anything, but it definitely makes me happy to read. Even because the concern I think a lot of people in Dota have is Valve is so hands off. You feel like they don't care. And so, to hear that they're committed to growing into Dota again, that just, it at least brings a little bit of warmth into your heart.
It does. It certainly does. And this came out, I feel like, right, like 1 or 2 days before TI started, where there was a lot of negative backlash around TI, and everybody was like, this is going to be the worst TI. Dota is going to die. We're going to lose all the players, and like everybody being absolutely melodramatic over there. And there was also the thing about the TrueSight. I don't know if we talked about it in the previous podcast or not, but there was like this rumor going around that Valve wouldn't be making TrueSight anymore. And that rumor was just started as a rumor by a podcast, by the Monkey Business podcast from OG. And I feel like it shows the responsibility you have as a public figure in Dota to maybe not start a rumor like that. I'm just gonna be honest from my end. Like, I feel like if you don't know for certain something like that, you don't say that.
They got those clicks. I will say, I do wonder how much of the concern comes from the TI prize pool this year. I think it's an interesting thing because, I mean, it was 18 million this year. Still a crazy high number, but by no means does it hold a candle to previous TIs. And so you look at the lower amount of money that the Battle Pass made, that TI had, obviously. You're wondering, like, well, is this finally it? Is Valve gonna stop sinking their resources into trying to make money out of Dota, or I guess it's well known that it's a passion project for them at least. But I do wonder how much that plays into it.
For sure. I often wonder, like, that question of like, oh, what if Valve steps out? Like, what if they don't do anything with Dota anymore? Just like as a hypothetical, what would happen? I actually don't think that Dota would die. I think the game itself is far too good to just die. It would become much more grassroots. It would become much more community driven. It would become much smaller prize pools for sure. But I don't think people would give up on the game. I don't think it is necessarily just the money that makes Dota great.
Agreed. And I mean, we all play the game because it's the greatest game ever made. Very simply
best
put.
Game ever made. The best game ever made.
I've had this interesting thought experiment. I've done it before where it's like, well, what if Riot was running Dota?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, it's just hard to look at the amount of effort that these other companies put into their games and be like, and you know, Dota's just here in the background, just like waving. We're that meme. It's the dog in the fire. Like, this is fine.
Yeah.
So it's hard to look at, you know, the amount that Riot does and the amount of success that they have and the publicity they get for their game and how popular it is, and be like, well, if Dota got this, I feel like if Dota got that, it would obviously be number one. That might not be true necessarily because of the difficulty to getting into Dota, but you feel like more exposure and effort would go a long way for the game.
Mm-hmm. I think we, like, both you and I are 100% in agreement on that one, that like if we could have the gameplay and balance of like Dota with Valve and the marketing and publicity of Riot, like that would just be fantastic. The marketing, like I will also say, like part of why the marketing for Riot is so successful is because of how they handle their game. It is much easier to have marketing campaigns running when you know for sure that there will be a new champion every month and a half or however fast it is, and that there are like 5 new skins that are all a little bit sexually driven at times.
Hey, did you see those Marcy skins from the collector's cache or whatever it is?
Oh man, look, I voted yes on many of them, not on the too simpy one, but let's give Marcy some good skins there. But let's not go down the rabbit hole of being too League of Legendsy. But yeah.
Yep, agreed. And the difficulty for Dota obviously makes it tough to get into, so.
Yes.
But we had good news. Valve is not killing Dota quite yet. So now we're done with TI, so we're fully into the post-TI swing. The post-TI shuffle, debatably more interesting than TI at times. So some big news already. I think the big one that is officially confirmed is ATF, Amar the Effer, has left OG. So he's on their inactive roster, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But he is pursuing other opportunities. And so the questions, you know, and apparently, so he's going to be looking to play either offlane or carry. So the question is, where is he going? And what position? And who is OG bringing in to replace him? Probably as an offlaner.
I've heard I don't know if that was like any source or so, but I feel like I've heard of people saying maybe Saberlight to OG, which I feel like that might be a good fit. I'm not sure.
I heard an interesting rumor. You want to hear it? So the rumor I heard was that Misha will also be out, and that Crit will be going to back to OG, and Taiga will step into the captain role, which I do feel like he was. I don't know. I obviously don't know the dynamics, but Tiger was pretty much playing the POS 5 at times last year.
Yeah.
He was the most flexible support player in the world, I believe. And so he would step into the POS 5 role. Crit would come into play 4. That would be interesting.
That would be very interesting. And who would be playing 3 still then?
I think that one's still TBD. But that was just some OG related stuff that I had heard. Don't know if it's true. I do think that there are not many offlane players that are obvious. And that was part of why ATF was, part of what made OG was they kind of took these players out of nowhere. They were just pub stars and they made them into like top 8 at TI team, So I'm curious to see where he goes because he had such a unique style in the off lane. He literally just played carry from the off lane. And so I'll be curious if he actually winds up staying in the off lane or if he actually just winds up playing carry. Because at times you'd watch OG's games and you'd be like, well, they just have 2 carries. Because ATF would be farming the entire game.
Yeah, like we have in our outline, you were like ATF leaving OG will be looking to play offlane or carry, and I just feel like we'll be looking to play offlane and carry. It's not an or, the way that he's been playing. Yeah, I'm a little bit sad that OG is if OG is breaking up because I think it is healthier overall for the scene and for teams to stay together through difficulties instead of massive shuffles after potentially 1 or 2 bad results. And like for OG, like 4 of their players, it was their first TI and they placed well. Like people were expecting them to go higher. Yes, they were, but like it was their first TI.
I will say, part of me does wonder from a from a playing Dota aspect, how much of them ATF leaving or him being I don't know. I don't know if he was kicked or if he left or both or whatever. I do wonder how much of it has to do with his inflexibility as a player. And I can only speak to what he plays in officials, but he didn't play Enigma. He doesn't play. I don't think he plays Beastmaster. He didn't play Brood. He didn't play Visage. He doesn't play any of these micro heroes that when they're good, you have to be able to play them. And so it is another thing to think about, is this player adaptable enough to sustain himself in the, as an offlaner at least. So that's part of why I think he might become a carry player personally.
I think it's like that adaptability, I feel like is a quality that esports athletes like across the spectrum need to have. Because like every game, like I think that's like one of the big difference between esports and normal sports is like there are many more changes in esports happening rapidly compared to like normal sports. And that adaptability is always going to be something that you have to think about.
Agreed. So the other big news, well, I guess there's 2 other big things. The first one, this was already confirmed, but Matu has retired. That was his big thing with TI, was that it was his last run. So good on him. The scene will miss him for sure. So Liquid, off of their top 3 placing, top 3 placing, will need to replace him at carry. So I guess ATF is in the talk. So you'd imagine just off of that.
Yeah.
So just a tribute. I don't really have too much carry ideas. I know, you think Sumail or TZ, all of these carries come to mind, but you don't really know for sure.
What about Crystallis? Like quite a few people say, well, they placed well at TI, but carry players got to go after 1 try. And so some people are saying Chrysalis might not stay a secret, or that Puppy might have given him some evil eyes.
Well,
So
I mean,
maybe that.
that feels very similar to the MR stuff, to the ATS stuff, where I do think one of the glaring problems with Crystalis as a player, Crystalis, however you say it, was he had a small pool, small hero pool. So I don't know if that would necessarily lead to him being kicked, but I do think it definitely played a factor in some of the limitations that Secret had drafting at TI. So maybe they'll revisit it. You know, they'll probably take a break. They'll have talks, and maybe Crystalis will be like, I'm gonna play 200 straight games of these heroes or something. I don't know. And maybe they'll keep him on from there. But again, that adaptability, like you said, plays an important part.
Yeah.
And so the other news was, and this was very unofficial, so grain of salt on that one, on this one, but apparently the news was that EG will be leaving NA.
Yeah.
They will be taking the Thunder Awaken slot, just taking the Thunder Awaken roster, but it'll now be EG. So there'll be an SA team in Dota 2. And so a couple of questions if that actually does happen is, first off, that's huge for SA, is getting a big org like that. They absolutely deserve more love down there. So that's great for them. But it sucks as an NA player, because in my opinion, EG is the only thing keeping NA Dota afloat. Yeah. And I guess we have TSM still here right now, but EG has been the NA staple for 5-6 years,
maybe.
And so them leaving NA makes me feel like the region is dead. It's just
hey, we have Snaking
and Owie.
I mean, I can't really talk about being dead if we have those two players. It's like, as you mentioned, massive for SA. I've also so like there've already been multiple shuffles a little bit. Another shuffle, it is not that they take the entire Thunder Awaken squad. They didn't take the offlaner Sacred and their mid laner Dark Mago. And instead, which is, in my opinion, another pretty big news, Beast Coast, former Infamous, which has been staying together for years now, they broke up. And that is actually where Chris Luck and Whisper, or C Smile and Whisper, these two are going to be joining, apparently, Thunder Awaken, who will be potentially signed by EG. Like, all of this is like kind of like rumors now. But it has been announced by Beast Coast that they took Dark Mago and I believe Alone or Sacred as their offlaner. So it is confirmed that they don't have Whisper and that they don't have C Smile anymore.
Yeah, agreed. Well, the big thing for me out of all of that, out of all the SA drama, is where does Whisper wind up? Because I think he's the player that now, multiple years into him being with Beast Coast, he's I think he was by far the best player on Beast Coast, simply put. And I feel like I'm probably not alone in that thinking. So in terms of his skill as an offlaner, he might be the best offlaner in the world. That title's probably held by 3-3 right now because they just won TI. But I feel like Whisper is very close behind. So, and it'll be curious to see what that winds up happening. I don't think any of this is official. The
Beast Coast new lineup is official.
So Beast Coast officially has theirs. So the question is, what's going to happen with Thunder Awaken? Which again, if EG goes out of NA, the question is, what happens with Arteezy and all of these other players? So curious to keep your eyes on it. There's a lot of stuff going on. None of this is official.
And it is Sacred as their offlaner for Beast Coast as well. So it's
Okay.
K1, Dark Mago, Sacred, Gojira, Stinger.
There's pretty much like a 50-50 on the teams. They just like split them up evenly.
Yeah, and I mean, it is, if that is going to be Whisper with Prakash, I feel like these two, in my opinion, are the standout players from South America who just look insane.
Yeah, I think
simply look insane.
I think when you watched Beast Coast games, you're like, this Whisper guy is on another level. And when you watched Thunder Awaken games, you're like, Akaz is insane. And so you imagine both of those guys on the same team, that could be lead for some crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm. It can also, like, sometimes, I am gonna say, it's also the team dynamic that makes certain players look like standout players.
True. Yeah.
So it's always like, that's where like team shuffles can always be like, well, in theory they sound really good, but is it actually gonna work? You know, the superstar team of Secret, it didn't work out very well for him.
Puppy's worst TI placement was with that superstar team. So
yep.
So anything else on that?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Okay. So moving on to some other esports news. So the world of esports
I feel like
was very
I'm gonna be taking a little bit more on the reins here.
The world of esports was very busy in the last month or so. So there was League of Legends Worlds, which were in Atlanta, Georgia, I believe. So that was cool, by the way, that it was in the US. And the Age of Empires World Championships happened. So starting with
it's not officially the World Championship. It's like called the Red Bull Wololo event, but it is one of the biggest events.
Okay,
I would say,
it's one of their biggest events. So starting with Age of Empires, our very own C-Dub Dagao was actually invited. He unfortunately got knocked out in groups, but he had some impressive games. But you can take it away from there.
Yeah, he won 2-0 against Doubt, which is like a player that has been playing the game for like 20 years now, and like for multiple years was considered one of the strongest players. So certainly strong showing there. And overall, like that event, I feel like it's now the 5th or 6th iteration of that event. And that event very much brought Age of Empires kind of back into like mainstream esports. And so it's a very, very fun event to watch. I highly recommend it. They hold it in a castle in Germany. And they not only have Age of Empires 2, they also have Age of Empires 1, and they had Age of Empires 4. 3 was not invited. And I'm just gonna go over the results and so Age of Empires 1, I feel like it's a little bit of a fun fact. That game, or the esports scene, is pretty much only active in Vietnam. All of the pro players for Age of Empires 1 are Vietnamese, pretty much, which I feel like is kind of a fun fact, that like a game is just like alive in one country and pretty much nowhere else, really.
That is interesting.
Meanwhile, so then in Age of Empires 2, which I feel like is kind of the biggest title, we had the grand finals between Tato and Leary. Both of these are like kind of household names in the Age of Empires 2 community. However, Leary has been in every single grand finals of the Red Bull Wololo event, while for Tato it was his first grand finals, and he won 4-2 in a best of 7 grand finals. There are best of 7s, and it was a very, very fun series to watch. So if anybody's interested in Age of Empires 2 or just like real-time strategy in general, watching this event is very fun, very, very fun. And then Age of Empires 4 had Marine Lord, which I feel like if you've watched some StarCraft 2 back in the days, you most likely heard of him, as he was pretty big there. He won 4-0 over the Mista. And that was kind of a shellacking there. Not gonna lie, Marine Lord just kind of looked on a different level. So, but that is like a little bit of like going into the RTS scene, which I personally am like a big fan of, and people like play more RTS games. They're very fun.
Do you think that the Age of Empires is hard to get into, or is it beginner friendly for somebody that's trying to get into or watch the game?
So I have actually no real idea about Age of Empires 1 apart from like that it's only active in Vietnam. I have like 70, 80, 100 hours or so in Age of Empires 2. I have like 30, 40 hours in Age of Empires 4. Age of Empires 2 has some things that annoy the fucking shit out of me when playing it. Because it is a game that is now 20 years old and there are things being kept in the game that were like made due to restrictions on like the system when the game was made. Like such as like if you like take 7 different units and make them walk somewhere, they will all move at the speed of the slowest unit, which can look very, very funny if you have the slowest unit, a monk, together with a knight, which is a very fast on a horse, and the horse just moves at the slowest speed. But it makes it very annoying because it means you have to micromanage a lot of different things. It's a lot of things, of micromanaging things. And so I always say Age of Empires 2, at times you play against the game as much as you play against your opponent, which makes it, especially at the beginning, hard to get into. However, it is easy to get into in the sense that there are a lot of people who are not good at the game and have a ton of fun playing. The community is very, very receptive of people who are not good and also never try to be good, who are just like trying to build some of their fun units and have them run at each other. And in that sense, it's very easy to get into. Watching it at a high level, I would say, can be more difficult because all of the civilizations can look very similar while they have like very different tech trees. And compare that to StarCraft 2. In StarCraft 2, it's very clear. These are humans. These are Zergs. You can see the difference. You can see like how they use different things. While in Age of Empires, different civilizations might have different cosmetics on how their houses look and all of that. But there are still many, many units that have overlapping things in what they do, and like the small differences, memorizing that across like 35 or 40 different civilizations is weird and feels monotonous at times to me. And so in that way, I feel like it's like if you like the game, get into it. It's a fun game to play, but it can be tough to get into at the beginning. Age of Empires 4, in my opinion, is one of the easiest RTS to get into at the moment. They have a great tutorial that also gets you prepared for online play, where they actually have like actual tutorials that show you how you can play the early game for every civilization in like an online competitive fashion and stuff like that. So it's very, very friendly in that way. And Age of Empires 4 has less civilizations. It has like currently, I think, 10, which are much more distinct from one another. And in that sense, I feel like it's the easiest RTS to get into at the moment. But I'm actually not sure how good it does in terms of player numbers.
No idea.
Yeah.
So while he's looking that up, the other big news, League of Legends Worlds finished. DRX went on pretty much a miracle run, right? They won the finals 3-2 versus T1, who most people know, at least the very least, they know Faker plays for T1 right now. And it was it was like if Team Liquid was playing it was like if Team Liquid had Matu making their run, but they had won, but Matu hadn't won a TI, right? Was pretty much what this DRX run was like. Yeah, and so it was just beyond impressive that they managed to win.
Yeah, the storylines of this year's League of Legends Worlds was insane. And I don't really like recommending watching League of Legends games because pro games can feel very slow and just like not very interesting. It's most of the times like one team gets a lead of 500 gold and then they just keep extending that lead and then they've won the game. But this grand final series, game 1 was a little bit of a stomp, as every single series, DRX lost their game one and they kind of get stomped every time. And then they come back, and they came back in this grand finals as well. And like the other 4 games were pretty much all insane and very close and just fantastic to watch. Like so many clutch moments going back and forth. Like just some of the, like, I think this is the best League series I have ever watched.
Huh. Well, I like you said, I don't watch much League because it can be tough to, for a couple of reasons, it can be tough to watch as a Dota fan because of, first off, I don't understand the game as well, and I don't really know what's happening, but also because the game just stylistically feels slow compared to Dota, which I guess Dota can be slow at times too. So, you know, I kind of get that.
I highly recommend watching at least Game 5 of that series. Game 5 was, oh my god, it was so back and forth, and it had like the storylines of this year's League of Legends Worlds was, so we had Deft on DRX and we had Faker on T1. Deft had been multiple times in the grand finals and has not won it yet. Faker has won it multiple times, but hasn't been in the grand finals for the past 4 years. Faker and DRX went to the same high school. And
you mean in Faker and Deft?
Yeah, Faker and Deft. Yeah, Faker and Deft, sorry. And Deft like heard about Faker being like such a great player, and he apparently like made like had like a promise to him, like it's like, I will be the better player than you. And then the support player of T1, Carrier, once was the support player for Deft, and Carrier told Deft, I will win the championship with you. And so Carrier lost against Deft, and he had literally a breakdown on stage. Like he broke down crying, which was heartbreaking to see. And like you can really see both teams just played their hearts out, and the storylines that went with it, it was insane. It was just insane.
I know that a lot of my Twitter feed was full of content creators that were at the event. Just they were like in shock of what had happened.
Yeah,
because it was, I mean, Game 5 World Championship, the storylines, like you said. So I'm gonna have to check it out. Everybody else should check it out too.
Just one moment here. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but so there's one moment. I don't know how, like you've played League, so you know, like if you get a team wipe, you want to go for like a Drake or a Baron or something like that. And so in the last game, DRX gets like 3 kills, and usually like you can't fight 2v5, and so they go Baron. And
oh wait, I think I might know. Okay, continue. I think I may have seen this, or at least saw the spoiler.
Yeah, the AD carry player of which is like the position 1 player of T1 was still alive, and he went to the pit, shot in 1 arrow, and that arrow killed Baron and gave. So the way that Baron works, like whichever kill team kills the Baron gets a very, very strong buff. And so he stole that buff from DRX. And like that shouldn't have happened. It just shouldn't have happened. DRX messed up that this has happened, but DRX was mentally strong enough. Like it was like pretty much like it's on the jungler that this happened. And the jungler literally made like some of the most game-winning plays after that for DRX to win them this game. Like the mentality that goes into losing something like that and then winning the game, it was insane. It was insane.
And I would say it's like the equivalent of, you know, getting Roche snatched, but then the person lives. But in League, it's almost worse. Right, because it's your entire team gets the buff from the Baron. So I'm going to check it out. So I do want to. I think we're going to be wrapping things up here. I forgot to do it at the beginning. I just wanted to briefly promote C-Dub's site is officially live.
Ooh.
So cdub.gg. You can check it out. Shout out to my good friend Sensei Raven 1 for working with us and putting this all together. It's not perfect, but he did a great job. It looks great. So we have information on our current teams, our current players. We have some of their socials on there. We have our upcoming calendar, at least for the Dota side. I'm not too sure exactly what's on the Age of Empires side. But all of that upcoming content as well. There will be more and more stuff. Links to the podcast on the site as well. If you aren't sure where to find us, it looks really nice. So
I'm just looking at this. This looks very good. This looks very good here. Everybody check it out. cdub.gg.
It's a big change from what we had before. So we actually have a functioning site. So so that's all I think I have. Do you have any closing words, Apon, before we peace out of here?
Well, everybody, thank you so much for indulging us here, just talking about the Dotes, talking about esports. Brightside, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you. But also, if you have like a question about something or anything like that, don't forget, like make a comment on YouTube, reach out to us via Twitter, and we'll be happy to talk about it during the next podcast.
Or even if you have something you want us to talk about, you know,
absolutely,
we can probably fit that in here. We've only talked for about over an hour, so we don't have time.
Yeah. So I'm always at the beginning of the podcast, I'm like, can we really fill a lot of time with this? And then we talk, and then we're like, oh, we've spilled a lot of time.
Yeah, we had a big break though, so maybe next time we'll be a little bit more pressed for time. Not as much crazy stuff going on. So, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Wherever you find your podcast, if you could like it on there as well. And we'll see you next time.